My guest today is a true guitar nerd, in the best sense of that term. He recruited none other than Steve Vai and Joe Satriani for his new band. Or was it the other way around?
I think the other way.
Either way, Joe Satriani says he's the guitar player I wish I was. He's indeed highly versatile, always has an amazing sound, and is just truly a great player. Welcome to this episode.
Thank you so much.
Thorn.
Thanks for having me.
How are you doing?
It. Oh, I'm really good. Yeah, really good. Yeah, it's nice to be here in the Netherlands. So, yeah.
That must have been something, right? Like getting a call from either Joe or Steve or somebody in his surroundings, so to say.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, for sure. You know, it's not lost on me. These are two of my heroes, you know, from growing up, and I spent plenty of time. There's a picture of me in my high school yearbook playing in the auditorium at my high school at like a lunchtime concert. And I'm playing Satch Boogie in that picture.
Nice.
And I would have been about 17 or 16 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I was a fan, you know, going way back of Joe and certainly of Steve. You know, both these guys I followed. For me, certainly Eddie Van Halen, you know, Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, Eric Johnson, four of my big heroes from, especially, you know, late 80s into the 90s. I spent a lot of time listening to these guys and also learning, you know, from them.
Yeah, what's the main thing you took? Because Joe and Steve are obviously different players, but what did you take from them?
With Joe, I would say that if we were to use the song Always With Me, Always With You as an example, it's such a masterfully constructed instrumental guitar song. There's not a lot of people that seem to be able to pace themselves like him and pull in a listener for an entire song. You know, there's plenty of guitar players, and especially these days in the kind of Instagram and social media culture, we see these quick 30-second or 45-second bits of shredding and crazy guitar feat, you know, but to hold someone's interest for an entire song and to have kind of an arc, that's the main thing that I learned from Joe. His craft, songwriting, you know, amazing guitar playing, but, you know, the guy can write a melody and he can write really interesting changes in kind of the classic, almost pop or pop rock sense, which is one of the reasons why he's one of the only guitar players that's ever had hit songs on the radio, you know, and that always blew me away about him. So coming back to where I started, Always With Me, Always With You, it starts with a sort of a little bit Every Breath You Take arpeggiated guitar part that cycles around for a little while before there's actually a melody that comes in. And so that the arpeggiated part itself is really beautiful and hooky, and it's simple, but pulls the listener in. And then when he finally comes in with a melody, and I'll add, he comes in with a melody not on beat one, it's on the and of two, I think. I've thought a lot about this song. And so he waits for a second before the melody comes in on the sort of the bar where it enters. And then he plays this beautiful melody that's like a singer singing, you know.
So is it that kind of detail, like you say pace, so he waits?
And he says something on the guitar with a phrase and then gives it a little space and then says something else very conversational and pulls the listener in. It's like a singer singing, you know? And then he builds that. So he might move it up an octave the next time he plays it. And, you know, to give a sense of lift, you know, that kind of thing, and start to vary it a little bit and play around with it a little bit, maybe add just a little bit more flash. And eventually, you know, you're going to get to the part where he burns on the guitar, but it's never too soon. You know, he really pulls you in with the melody and he gets you in this state where, and this holds true for even his more sort of complex rock numbers or faster moving, faster paced rock numbers. You know, it's like he just has a way of pacing and his composition. That's what really got me. I mean, obviously he's an amazing guitar player and technician on the guitar, but it's more than that. He's got so much more. So that's Joe, you know.
And Steve.
So Steve, I remember the Attitude song. You know, I remember Daily Roth, you know, Flexible. I had a copy of Flexible. I still have that same copy of Flexible on LP. And the Attitude song knocked me out because it's probably one of the first times I became aware of like odd meter of, you know, when I was a kid. I was maybe 10 years old when I was hearing that, or 11. I was like, oh, that's weird. That's cool, you know? And then I started investigating, you know, Zappa, and I was, oh, he played with Zappa. That's interesting. And then the Crossroads movie and David Lee Roth and all that kind of happens around the same time. So here's this guy that just starts blowing my mind, you know, around that time. Obviously super versatile and, kind of, you know, Van Halen was top of their game right then, had the split with Roth, and Dave went off and did his own band and stuff. And of course he recruits Steve, and it's like, well, there's that guy I've been hearing about again. And then he played the Attitude song. And so then when that record comes out, it's a really great record. That first Dave Lee Roth solo album with the Eat Smile record with Steve and Billy Sheehan and Greg Bissonette and stuff. So that was a big influence on me, that record. And I sat there and learned, you know, Going Crazy and Big Trouble and Ladies Night in Buffalo and all these songs, you know, learning note for note.
But he kind of proves there's no boundaries, right?
Yeah, well, he was obviously no boundaries, I would say. I mean, like, he was obviously so versatile. And I was hearing that all in a 2 or 3 year span. It's like, oh, he can do this and he can do that, and super clean tones and kind of, and there's a lot of humor in his playing too. Yeah, maybe the first guitar player I became aware of where it was like the, you know, like the laughing guitar on,
and also delivery out of tune, like
yeah. Or sorry, on the single off of that's the song I was trying to think of, Yankee Rose, the laughing guitar at the beginning, like, is funny sounding, you know. And I was a kid, and I was like, he's got a lot of humor in it, so all those emotions, you know. And then of course Passion Warfare, you know, comes out later and becomes I think platinum album, if not multi-platinum album. It's a very popular album. But it's so sophisticated, you know, so he had this sophistication and layers and, like, you know, and it was really interesting to him, to hear him do his own thing, you know, with the solo records once he got into that phase of his career and stuff. So anyway, both these guys thought a lot about them, big influence, and spent a lot of time learning and studying.
Can you tell me something about that call, or was it a call? Was it an email
from Joe?
Yeah.
So it was Joe that actually contacted me. So I had met Joe once, very briefly, 2009, backstage at a show that we were both on. He was playing with Chickenfoot, his band, with Michael Anthony, Sammy Hagar, and we were on the same festival. I was with Chris Cornell. And I remember it was Michael Anthony's birthday, and we all ended up in the Chickenfoot dressing room, and we were all hanging out, and it was a really, really fun night. So I played with Chris Cornell. Chickenfoot played after us, I think, at some point. So that was the first time I got to say hello to him. And we had just finished our set, went back, and I remember shaking Joe's hand and just briefly meeting him because he was warming up. He was getting ready for the show. And so we had met then. And then a number of years later, probably maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we're contacting each other over DM occasionally. He would just ask me things like, hey, what do you think about Les Paul Customs? You know, what's your take on Les Paul Customs? Because I'm looking for a cool one right now and stuff. And just ask me questions about what I thought about certain guitars, and which I was honored about. It's like, oh, Joe's asking me questions. He's one of my heroes, you know, about guitars. And I would say, well, I think, you know, I've got one that's really cool. It's got a really deep rock tone, and it's got an ebony board like they do. And I think they sound a little different than, you know, rosewood board Les Pauls. And we would just talk about things like that, but just over DM. Mm-hmm. So we'd never really spoken. And then over DM, he contacted me and said, hey, I got a crazy idea. You got time for a phone call? And that's where the idea came up on the.
So tell me, what, like?
Well, he said he'd like to get together and have a face-to-face meeting with me and talk. And he mentioned that, you know, I'm going to do a record with Steve Vai, and you know, I'd like to put a band together for, you know, one band for the record and for a tour. And so he had floated that, the concept of it. So let's get together and talk about it. So we met up, and we had a great chat just about music and guitar and life and all kinds of things for a couple of hours. It was really, really nice. And we talked about Ritchie Blackmore for a while, and we talked about all kinds of things, you know, just guitar related. And he mentioned to me that the reason that he was contacting me and was interested in having me involved was because he'd listened to my second record. And he thought, upon listening to that album, he thought just sort of his take on me was that I understood rock guitar playing. Like,
that's Pete Thorn too, right?
That's Pete Thorn too. Yeah. Was that, you know, and, you know, I've learned a lot from Joe, like I say, and my composition style falls somewhere in the, because
There's
big
one song
influence.
on your solo albums that reminds me a little bit of Satch Boogie.
Yeah.
I'm bad at names.
It's called Dirty Town.
Okay, yeah.
Direct drawing from Satch.
Yeah.
It was kind of my ode to Satch Boogie as well as Hot for Teacher, and sort of the lack of that sort of boogie shuffle in modern. You hear a lot. You don't hear that kind of and it's fun. So I like that. So I thought I got to do one of those on my record. So that's where that came from.
I heard it and I was like, that this must be. Has some relation with Joe. Yeah, but it's true. Right?
And even the middle section of the song, I tried to not get too close to it, but the middle section of the song where it goes kind of halftime and opens up into a different feel and gets kind of spacey, he does that in Satch Boogie, where the bridge goes not blues, it's not blues rock, and I tried to get more sort of modal and spacey and a little bit more atmospheric and stuff, and then somehow bust back into the double time thing. So that is indeed where that came from. So he must have heard that and gone, this guy maybe understands where I was coming from when I was doing Satch Boogie, etc. So, so a big part of the gig, I think, is doing things that he did rhythm guitar wise. For instance, on certain songs that he recorded and became well known for. So, I think it makes sense to me that he would want somebody that was rooted in that. Like the way you play eighth notes or whatever and mute and that kind of thing, that he would want that behind, like something close to what he had done on the record, in the spirit and intention and tone and everything like that. So I think that's a big part of why he contacted me. Steve, I've met a number of times over the years, under different circumstances and run into and stuff. So I've spoken to him quite a bit more over the years. And he's always a lovely guy. And just, I'll say about Steve, one of the greatest things about him is that have you ever met him before?
Yeah, twice. Yeah.
When you met him, did he ask you quite a bit about yourself and what you do and what it is that you...
Shortly, because he was rehearsing with the Metropole Orchestra. So it was a bit of time stress. But what I do remember, that he was really there.
Very present.
Very present. Yeah. And every question I asked him, he really gave an answer.
Sure. Okay.
Right? Yeah. You know what I mean?
100%. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I was very struck by that, how present, and how engaged, even meeting him backstage when it's a little chaotic after a show or something. But he would ask every time I met him about me and what I was up to, Oh, I saw this thing you did, and then he'd be talking about it and tell me about that, and so you would, and then he's busy because he's got a lot of people to talk to after the show, but he would spend a considerable amount of time. And I would always walk away. This is numerous times meeting Steve. I would walk away and always feel like, did I just talk about myself too much? But he was asking questions, so, and he would make you feel, I feel like he must do this, he just makes people feel valued. And it's honest. It's coming from like a real place of, he makes an effort to make a connection when he speaks with you. And it's always, and I think that's just one of his human traits, his humanity, so that really had a big impact on me. So as I said in another interview,
just has some sort of mindset also, right? Like wanting to be present, and that as a musician, that's important, of course, as well. But just as a human being, right? I mean,
well, it seems like that's probably how he approaches his music too, because when you listen to it's like a song of his, like Little Pretty, which is this incredible composition that's rather new. When I listened to that, at first listen, I was like, man, this is out, it's so cool, but it's really kind of, there's a lot of altered chords in it and it's kind of bent and things. And then you listen to it again and again and again. And within a day or two, it's stuck in your head like a hook is stuck in your head, and it's like, I couldn't stop thinking about it for a few days. And then I thought, what it must have taken to get there to compose something like that. That was so kind of, it's just really reaching, in a great way. Like there's not phoning it in compositionally at all. And then, so when we talk about being present, like how present does he have to be to write something like that? What's going to come next? Where do I want to go from here? Then what am I going to play over this section? And, it's an amazing piece of music. So I think about that with how he approaches his work.
I remember one thing he mentioned during an interview I had with him, and that always stuck with me, that I found very interesting, is that he embraces mistakes, so to say. So he records improvisations, and where it goes wrong, he's like, there's something interesting there. And I'm going to enhance that. I'm going to make it bigger. And then it's something new.
Warren Haynes said, mistakes are opportunities.
Exactly. But that's really what he does, right? Like, and then he comes up with things. You're like, you can't make that up like just from your head. You have to, I don't know. It's difficult for me to explain, of course, but like to have done it first and then make it bigger. I thought that's a super interesting approach, right? In inventing.
It really is. Yeah. To embrace something that might be a little bizarre at first, but then be like, it's an interesting thing. I made a record a number of years ago with a singer-songwriter named Holly Henderson, and she just has this innate kind of artistic ability to kind of go there, like with the way that she hears chord changes and melody and harmony. And she, when she was, I think she was, 19 or 20 when we were making this record, and she would go somewhere in the bridge of a song, and I would be like, that's really weird. And then after 5 listens, I'd go, God, that is cool, and she just had this thing. And so I had to, my friend Dennis said to me, the hardest thing about this project, because I was producing, and he said, the hardest thing about this project is not going to be for you to screw it up, which meant stay out of her way, to know when to offer, like, I think we should do this differently, and also know when to shut up and let her just go, because she's got really big ears. And that was a fascinating project. But anyway, similar, where it's like, I'm always amazed when people have that ability to stretch and, go to these places that then stretch my awareness of, oh, you can do this or that, or, rhythmically or harmonically, or, it's really interesting.
Hey, I mentioned in the beginning Guitar Nerd, and that's obviously your album, The Revenge of the Nerd, right?
Right. Yeah.
So were you a guitar nerd from the get-go? Did the guitar put its hooks in you right away, or
kind of?
Yeah.
Within a relatively short period of time of me picking it up, I would say within 6 months or so, I was getting really like, oh, I found my thing. Actually, it was music, to be honest, because there was a kid in my neighborhood that was nice enough to kind of show me what it was to listen to music. He had a huge album collection. He was a few years older than me, and he was kind of like, I didn't have any older brothers. I had an older sister. She also had an impact on me musically, but I'll say it was this other fella that kind of was like, all right, you want to listen to music? Here, come on over, and we'll put this record on. Here's the record jacket, because this was back to LPs still. I mean, CDs were just coming out around the time I started listening to music. I'm that old, so. He would hand me the record jacket and say, just sit there and read the liner notes and, listen to the music. When this side's over, we'll flip it over, but listen to the whole thing. And, I was like 10 or something, or 9. So I was like rambunctious, and like, he's like, just sit there, kind of teaching me how to listen. And I was like, okay. And then I got immersed in this world of, Pet Sounds era Beach Boys and the Beatles and Van Morrison and the Who and the Jam and just all this great music that he was into. But he really wasn't into hard rock. That was my sister. My sister was really into Thin Lizzy, early Metallica as it was coming out. She was way ahead of the curve on Guns N' Roses before anybody knew who they were, because that record was out for a while before it broke. She was playing me that. She was just really into kind of harder rock and metal and stuff. And so that's where I got that from. And, but I liked it all.
But it's such a beautiful thing as a kid, discovering music, right? If you go back there in your mind, it's like, it's really a world opening up, right? Yeah,
the world opened up. I would go see all the shows. It was still the era of, where you could line up for tickets and get a great seat. It wasn't like Ticketmaster or whatever's going on now and super expensive tickets. I mean, everything was like $10 to $20 for a ticket to see a major band. And I saw most of them that came through my hometown sitting in, the first 10 rows on the floor, because
it's Edmonton, Canada, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because I would wait out and buy tickets and get the good seat, sit there, and then I'd experience the arena rock as it was,
Were there a lot of bands playing there, or what's kind
of?
of?
Everybody, man. Okay. I mean, everybody. I saw Journey on the Escape tour, Van Halen on the 1984 tour. I saw the Doobie Brothers on their final tour. They're still together touring now. It was their final, I think it was 82 or something like that, with Michael McDonald, and, it was awesome. I saw just about everybody that came through town, Def Leppard on the Hysteria tour, Iron Maiden on the Power Slave tour, Judas Priest on the Defenders of the Faith tour. I saw all those shows from the it's kind of like 82 or 83 onward. I saw Ozzy like 3 weeks after Randy Rhoads had passed away.
Wow.
And he had Brad Gillis with him.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
So I remember all these shows like very well.
In what way were you playing back then? Were you shredding, or can you tell me something about that?
I had picked up the guitar and was learning, and then quickly became aware of this magic era of guitar that was happening with folks like Steve and Joe and certainly Van Halen. I remember the '84 album coming out and just then going backwards, and going, oh my God, there's all this other great, the first 6 albums, Van Halen records. But I was also into everything that was Prince was out, the Pretenders were out, AC/DC, there were so many great records, Steve Stevens with Billy Idol, hearing those tones and, songs like Flesh for Fantasy and all that crazy, cool, clean stuff that he was doing, The Fix, The Cure, there was all this great music, and I liked it all. I wasn't I'm just a metalhead, or I'm just this or that. I could appreciate a lot of it. And so it was this great time in music with all these killer records that are now super classic coming out. And on guitar, I had my little Hondo Strat and a Trainer 10-watt solid state amp and a chorus pedal and a Boss Super Overdrive, and just sat there and practiced.
So you were playing these songs, or or were you already into discovering scales and whatnot?
Well, I had some instruction. I had a violin teacher that I started on violin, actually, and I was actually playing more fiddle, Irish jigs and stuff like that. And that's what I really liked. And I quickly discovered guitar, and then the fiddle sort of became, fell by the wayside. So my fiddle teacher was teaching me a little bit of guitar, but he wasn't really a guitar teacher. And he said, I'm going to send you this other guy quickly within a month or two. So then I went to this fellow named Terry McDade, who's a local Edmonton area musician, comes from, has a very musical family. Everybody in his family plays music. And as a matter of fact, there's a family band called the McDades. They've gone on to win Junos that's like the Canadian Grammys.
Oh, yeah.
So, that was, in that house was where I was starting to really learn guitar with Terry and his family all around him. And his kids at that point were my age, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, something like that. So it was just super musical all of a sudden. I was immersed in this. I went to him for lessons for a few years, and then he sent me to a fellow named Brian Hughes, who's gone on to be a terrific jazz guitar player with his own jazz career and stuff, but also play with people like Lorena McKennett, who's a Celtic harpist, and he's gone on to do great things. And so he was teaching me guitar for a number of years. So yeah, scales and modes, and also I would just bring them songs on cassette or something, say, can you teach me what's going on here? And that was, you just heard me at Soundcheck upstairs actually play a little Jeff Beck because we had it as lovers.
Thank you for that.
That was, I love doing that every night. Brian was the first guy that ever played me that song.
Wow.
And which would be probably the first time I ever heard something like what Joe was doing a few years later.
So vocal, right?
Yeah, vocal singing on the guitar.
Yeah.
So I remember hearing because we ended as lovers through Brian for the first time, playing me Jeff Beck and stuff. That was where my first exposure to that. Oh, you can play melody on the guitar. That's cool, like a singer. So,
but there's one thing of liking it and thinking, this is cool, and there's another thing, really realizing this is just really what I want to do in life.
Sure.
Can you tell me something about that phase?
Yeah, I was 14, I remember, and I clearly remember becoming aware of Los Angeles and the kind of scene that was going on there, the GIT, and I was kind of getting obsessed with sort of like the some of the shredder guitar players like Paul Gilbert and stuff. And I was like, oh, he went to GIT. Maybe I should go to GIT. And I remember looking through the catalog that I had ordered, that's mailed it to me and getting it in the mail and then looking through it and be like, this is a school. Like, I want to go to this school and learn how to do this. This seems like, I was also aware, like, okay, Paul Gilbert went to this school and then he became an instructor. That's cool. And then he, at the same time, he's got his own bands like Racer X and then Mr. Big. And it's like, that seems like what I want to do, So I remember being about 14, home from on lunch break from school for just like an hour and sitting at the table and reading the MI catalog, GIT catalog, and saying to my mom, this is what I want to do. I want to go to this place. I mean it. Like, this is what I want to do. And she was like, well, I think you should do it then, And I was like, okay. Great. And so I was really devoted to it at that point. And then I remember...
Wait, pause.
Yeah,
because
sure.
Your mom saying, okay, do it. That's super important, right? I mean, did you reflect on that she actually did that and supported you?
Yeah,
What does that mean? Did that mean to you?
It meant a lot because my mom was really supportive. She would drive me to guitar lessons in the snow in Edmonton when it was like, because it's crazy. I mean, for folks here in Europe, it's like living in Finland or something. It's like literally freezing cold and, lots of snow. And she would sit there in the car and wait for me for half an hour in my lesson, and things like that. She was very, very, very supportive. Drive me to the guitar store so I could go look at guitars and things on Saturdays. She was so supportive. My dad was more skeptical. He wasn't like super supportive of it, but he wasn't totally against it either. But he wasn't having it that it was going to be my career.
That's what dads sometimes tend to be like, right? Like,
he was a businessman.
Yeah, are you going to make a living out of this?
Yeah, he wanted the best for me, and we had a successful family business at the time, and it was going well. And he would have loved it if I'd taken that over. I wanted to go to LA and rock, So that wasn't in his, he just couldn't see that from me. But I understand that too, because this is a time where Edmonton being kind of a fairly blue collar place, it's like he couldn't imagine that. And that wasn't part like, how do you make a living as a musician, But I was seeing some of these folks like my guitar teachers who would play local gigs at night as well. In Edmonton, making a living playing guitar, both teaching and then also playing out in bands. And I didn't even really need to see beyond that. I could just see that they were doing it and they seemed happy. They had homes. They weren't as fancy as I grew up fairly well to do in a nice house. And my dad had more money than these folks, but they seemed happy. Mm-hmm. That's all I cared about. Yeah. And so I had this it was almost like my older brothers or something that were showing me that, hey, you can be happy doing what you love. You might not be, a multimillionaire, but you can have a happy life playing music. And that had this really big impact on me. It was more important to me, I think, seeing them be consistently happy doing what they were doing than it was to pursue money at all costs or something. Not that that's what my father was about. It wasn't, but he just, I have to say, quite honestly, those folks did seem more elated with their career and with their, it was like, oh, I can do what I want to do, and actually make a living at it. That was profound. It doesn't have to be, all hard work and drudgery and whatever. Not that he didn't enjoy what I don't want to say that about my dad. That's not what I'm trying to say. But those folks did seem really happy on a consistent basis. That's all. So I had that.
So you were still 15, 16 when you had that? That's quite early to have that notion of thinking just to be happy, super important in life, right? I don't think every kid grasps that at that age, right?
I guess so. I was sort of standing above it and looking down and going what do I want? What? And it's I love this thing. And it was oh yeah, but that's a pipe dream playing music or whatever. And it was maybe it's not, because I had, role models that were, and then also, seeing folks like Paul Gilbert and also knowing that those guys had come from places like Pennsylvania and then moved to LA. They'd come from small town America, many of them. I was in contact with Richie Kotzen back then. Oh, wow. Yeah. Who I've gotten to know a little bit over the years since then. But Richie, got a deal on Mike Varney's label and put out a solo record. And he's my age. And so he had moved at a very young age to come out to LA. He was maybe a year older than me. That's it. And already had a record deal. And, I'd seen him come from a small town playing music and doing well. So I could see that. I remember writing him on the back of his solo record, his first solo record, there was a correspondence address to an address in Pennsylvania because he still lived there. And I wrote him a letter and he wrote back to me. And I got this letter, and I was like, oh, that's so cool.
You remember what he wrote?
I don't, but it was cool. It was really nice. And then when I moved to LA, I remember going to see him at the Central playing a solo gig because he had moved to LA. He was doing a gig at the Central, which is now the Viper Room in LA on Sunset Boulevard. So I remember going down and seeing him and just, it was all falling in line where it all made sense to me that if I just worked hard, really hard, like these guys did, that I could make a go at this and make it work, and I had role models and I could see it like with the clarity that maybe when you're naive and young, all the other roadblocks and things that could go wrong and things, or you'd follow, go down a wrong path or whatever. It just seemed to me like I could just see it. Like if I just do this, I can be one of these guys,
But it seems you weren't insecure of that, right? I mean, a lot of kids, just the idea of going to LA, it's a scary thought, right? Like, whoa.
Yeah,
it's a big city, and what am I going to do? But you have that. You say that I saw the path, so to say.
Credit to my folks once again, and we traveled a lot as kids. Myself and my sister. They took us on some really great trips. I remember coming over to Europe and to, I had been a number of places. I'd been to England. I'd been to Turkey, actually, and to Greece and to Israel and to, a number of different places, as well as in the States to a number of different places. We would go on great family vacations to LA, to, California or Southern California, to Hawaii, So I was already on planes and flying around and doing things and I found it amazing, traveling. I was like, oh, this is fantastic. There's other places outside of my hometown. So it didn't seem so, it's like, oh, I think I can navigate this. So I had a lot, ahead of me, that was challenging that I didn't realize. But I was also really determined, like, to not fail. I was like, I got to make a go at this.
Okay, you were determined. And in what way do you think, obviously hard work, that's how I'm going to get there. But were there any other thoughts that you thought, okay, this is what I need to actually really make it, or make the best out of myself, maybe, so to say?
It just seemed to me that if I'd had such good success with the role model thing, even in Edmonton, that when I came to LA, I was always seeking out people to learn from and to, that would kind of, mentor me a little bit. So by the time I had graduated from MI, I'd made some contacts that were really consequential for me. And I was learning from these folks. It was some Mark Goldenberg with one, Frank Symes, Jennifer Condell. So Mark Goldenberg played for a long time with Jackson Browne. He's a record producer, songwriter, amazing guitar player. And so I was seeing him. Frank Symes was Don Henley's musical director at the time. He'd also played with Stevie Nicks, Warren Zevon, a number of different people. He did the Mick Jagger Wandering Spirit album right around the time I met him. I was like, I think I'm in the right circle hanging out with these people, and I was 19 or 20.
But did you have an idea where you wanted to go as a musician? Like I want to make solo albums. I want to be that kind of guy, or what
I wanted to be in a band with as a member. That seemed like the best thing, like to be in a band where I could write, and because I loved writing and I loved recording and being a part of a project. The sort of the sideman thing that I ended up in wasn't till a number of years later. So initially it was the band thing. And everybody wanted to be in a band, I think, back in the 80s and the 90s, it was like bands were cool. That was where it's at. But once you spend a certain number of years and maybe you do sign a record deal, or maybe 2 or maybe 3, and you get in that van a number of times and, beat the street and go play gigs and travel around, and you end up kind of back where you started a couple of years later, which is often the case with, at least the way it used to work, with record labels and stuff. Then you get to a certain age where you're like, maybe I should explore other things, and that's where, hey, so-and-so is going on the road and they want to hire a guitar player. Are you interested? And then I would go, well, let's try that. Oh, they're on a tour bus? That's nice. I've never done that before. And you make a weekly salary, and it's kind of similar to like being in a band, except you're just sort of not the decision maker. It's more of a job. But there's a lot of the perks, where you get to perform music and travel and all this kind of. So I fell into that, and in between being in original bands and, signing deals, because I was in a number of bands. This is all way pre-YouTube and things where people got to know me. I'd had about 3 or 4 different signed bands I was in with record deals, gotten in the van, traveled all over America and Canada, sometimes to Europe, and done that, and yeah, like with most of those projects, the majority of those projects, they end up ending without anybody really maybe hearing about them. Or a small following, and then it falls apart. And that's the case often.
You can all look it up, probably, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was in a band called 40 Foot Echo that had a deal on Hollywood Records. I was in a band called Sparkler that had a deal on it was a subsidiary of Giant Records. A number of these groups I was in, and it just, is something that I think that if you can come out of and garner experience from, you can still go on and have a great career in music and just learn from it. Some people might have one of those experiences and then just get disillusioned by the music industry. But for me, it was just like, well, I can just go on to the next thing. One of the great things about being in a band like that doesn't go anywhere is that generally the record label drops you and then you're free to go. The worst thing is when they would hold on to an artist and say, oh, we don't hear a hit, but go back and write some more. And then they'd keep you for another 6 months and then another and it just, those kinds of experiences will leave musicians disillusioned, I think. So,
but was it in the back of your head because your first solo album came? You were already in your 40s. Am I correct or not?
Just about. If I wasn't, I was. It was 2011. So yeah, I was about 40. Yeah, when it came. I was actually. I remember I turned 40.
Okay.
Around the same week when it came out. I think now that you mention it, because I was in Costa Rica. And that was my 40th birthday, and that was right when the record came out.
So what did that mean to you? Because you could say it's relatively late in your career to release your first solo album, right? But you had the urge of doing it. So can you tell me what did that mean at that point in your career to release that?
It was such a relief and a landmark for me. So the whole guitar nerd thing was, if you've seen the cover, it's me as a little kid with like goofy thick glasses on because I've always had bad eyes and and with a bad haircut and everything. And it was just kind of almost like I was reflecting on actually some of the stuff I just spoke about, being in bands, trying to get record deals. There's a lot of sort of pleasing that goes on where you're like, trying to get a deal with somebody. Because back then there was these gatekeepers. It was like you had to have a good lawyer, you had to have a good manager, and then that would get you to the next stage where they'd get labels interested, and then maybe a label wanted to sign your band, and maybe not, but you were like doing these almost auditions, showcases for record labels. Where they'd come see you play. That happened. I was in a band called Snapdragon that was this close to signing a great big, $300,000 deal or whatever on RCA Records in like 1999 or 98. And it fell apart. We literally went to New York City. They flew us out there to play for the whole label and stuff. And that's when like the president saw us and was like, I don't think so. We had it in the bag. The VP of A&R was like, I'm signing you guys. This is it. Like, I just want to show you to the label. Something happened in New York where it just didn't come together. So it was like all these close calls where, you're up there like a performing monkey or something on stage.
You're not in
jumping
control.
Around.
I can imagine you feel.
Yeah, it's like you always had, there were these gatekeepers that had to decide, and they're looking for something that was wrong, not right. It'd be like, well, why shouldn't we sign this band? Or is, like, and it was just so, it could, like I say, it could be kind of disheartening and stuff. So and dressing cool, and are the songs cool? And
were you disheartened sometimes? Like that you really thought like, whoa.
Well, after that experience, that was a tough one because we were so close. And that was after a number of other times of being that close, where I thought next year is going to be different. This is going to be great. We're just going to get past this hurdle and then, we're going to be upwards and onwards. Mm-hmm. And then it just wouldn't happen. And so, to do Guitar Nerd was me putting, I mentioned the cover, it was me putting the silliest picture of myself on the cover that I possibly could. The most honest picture. Here's me, 11 years old, with my first guitar at Sears Photo Studio. You know, hey, Mom, can I take my guitar? We're going to take family photos. You know, can I take my guitar and do a photo shoot? Okay, you can take a couple. And that was one of those photos, because that is who I am. I was like, I'm just this guitar obsessed kid, and I was still that guy. And it was also just a reflection on the industry. Like, here's the dumbest picture I can find of myself. Most people, you know, we're going to take a band photo. We'll go stand out on the train tracks and look
Your
cool.
hair is gonna...
Yeah, and you got to do, you know, and you get a stylist and you look like whatever. And it was like, here's me in my dumb striped shirt or whatever. And it was just like, this is...
It must be liberating, right?
Yeah, it was so, and also the other thing that was liberating about it was I'd had some success as a sideman then. That was post playing with Chris Cornell. I was playing with Henley at the time, and things were going really well in my sideman career. But it was also like, okay, this is me. I'm going to be honest in every sense of, you know, music and what I'm in. You know, I'm not going to edit myself. This is going to be the songs I want to put on this record. I'm doing whatever I want to do on this record. And if people like it, that's fine. If they don't, I don't care. And we'd gotten far enough into the kind of the sort of indie releases and stage of, you know, it was 2010, 2011 when I was finishing up the record. We're like, oh, I can do this and put this out myself. And I had talked to a couple labels, and I was like, well, I don't understand what you guys I was already seeing in 2010, 2011, like, what do you guys do like now? Because if I can do this myself and, you know, release it digitally as well as on CD for people that still want that through, like, you know, I used CD Baby, which is still around, but it was back when people were still buying physical media. It was like, I don't think I want to sign a deal. I don't want to pursue it. I just want to kind of do this myself, and word of mouth and grassroots, get the word out that I've got a record out. So I did that. I put it out, and it became the #1 album on CD Baby that month, the first month of release. So instrumental guitar record, #1 on, you know, it was a way that indie musicians in the US would release records of this company, CD Baby. I put it out, and it was just like right away, I got like a restocking order from them. It was like, we need more because we've sold through everything the first day or whatever of release. And I was just like, this is amazing, you know? And I went to Costa Rica on vacation, which I'd never been able to do in any sign band I was in or anything. It was like, I couldn't, you know, I never saw anything back from any.
Just that decision of deciding, okay, I'm going to do something that I just really want to do. Sounds like a great counterbalance, so to say, because everybody in life, right? We're searching for balance, right? Like, but this, if you tell me, it seems like that you needed to put some weight there.
It was super validating. Yeah. And it was also like this weight off, because as a sideman, I mean, I see this a lot in younger musicians now in LA and in the scene, and especially in the pop scene in LA and stuff. Everybody's sort of clamoring for, you know, to put their foot in the, you know, like, you know what I mean? Like get in the ring and make their stand and, you know, a stake in it and stuff like that. And they'll put a lot of value in the gigs that they get. And there is value in gigs you get. If you can score a great gig with somebody and they recognize you, that's terrific. But don't tie up your value into those gigs, because that gig's going to end, you know. And the next year, you know, artists can be very fickle, or they can just be very, you know, pragmatic or realistic, where it's like, hey, I've got a different project going on over here. I've been asked to join a band, so I'm going to go over here and do this. And then all of a sudden you don't have a gig anymore. So you can't tie up too much of yourself in gigs. You know, it's a trap. You know, you want to, every gig you do, you want to put 300% into it and go for it and stuff, but don't be surprised when they end, because they always do. So,
but that's interesting
to make your own stand as a solo artist. All I'm saying is a great thing.
But from the perspective you had, sorry, I'm interrupting you, sorry, because this something pops up, because in the beginning you went there thinking, okay, I see musicians and they're happy.
Yeah.
But apparently life taught you, like, okay, it's you can approach it from many sides, right? And it's not just a path towards happiness, right? I mean, there's ups and downs, and
well, I had to maybe rediscover where the happiness was, you know. In Edmonton in the 80s growing up, it was a much simpler time. You know, we didn't have the internet yet. So this is things have changed by 2010.
Such a nice time, right?
Yeah, I know it was. There was great things about it, but it was also that era of wow. There was really like putting out an independent album was difficult. That meant printing up LPs and selling them out of the trunk of your car. That kind of thing back then. So yeah, it was kind of another magic time in music, I think, right around 2010, 11, where people were still buying physical media, but the digital transition was happening, and equipment had gotten good enough where you could record things that sounded really good in your home studio if you learned how to use your gear really well. And that was all culminating in it was just kind of like a magic time for me when I put out my first record, and it was. I rediscovered, I was like, oh, this is amazing. Also a thing happened, where it was guitar culture, in the 90s, all of a sudden you couldn't even play a solo anymore. It wasn't cool. You just had to play the vocal melody, Yeah. No, you couldn't do that. Couldn't do that. Be like, stop. Producer would be like, don't do that. So I sort of fell out of it's not that my interest just shifted for a minute. I kind of was listening to way more Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and singer-songwriters as opposed to Shredder. I had a totally different, interest where I was going back to my Beatles roots or something. And around the time I discovered, I'm still interested in rock guitar and, that this is my roots too. That I kind of had a rediscovering of that. And it was Steve Stevens put out a solo album around 2008, called, Memory Crash.
Yeah.
And it was great because it was he wasn't just shredding on it. He's such a great musician and songwriter. He was, compositions were really cool. And it was fun, that record. And I thought, I could do this. I could do a record like this. This is cool, And it was just if he can do it, I can do it, I'll try my hardest to make a record and it'll be my inspiration, And so, all that was helping me find the fun in kind of rock guitar again around that time. Yeah.
So that second album came out a few years later. Now it's been a while that you released this.
Yeah. It's time for another one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely time for
is that just an idea or is that really an idea that you...
No, I got to do it. I got to do another one. It's definitely time. When I do another one, I have this goal of making it simpler, though. Both of my records were fairly layered and kind of, studio creations. Mm-hmm. Dirty Town was actually quite live, that song, the one that we talked about a little bit earlier. But I want to actually record a record where I spend a little bit more time coming up with just compositionally stuff that I could play almost as a trio, or maybe with one other guitar player, and there's only a couple overdubs, and that's it. So almost the way that somebody like Joe Bonamassa would record a record, where it's I see these posts that he does when he starts an album project, and it'll be on a Monday on Instagram. He'd be starting to record the record today, and Thursday it'll be all done. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
You record a record in 4 days? But he's a blues musician, and it's that's how they've got the songs. They go in, they do the songs live, they cut live, and maybe overdub some vocals and stuff, and that's it. It's done. So I kind of want to approach it like that, that's you have to be disciplined with the compositionally, I think, and stuff to come up with stuff that's interesting and can stand on its own if it's just a few parts. Yeah, Andy Timmons is great that way too. Yeah, he's awesome.
But I guess it's a matter of focus, but also of being able to let go. Then, right? If I'm gonna make it simpler, again, you mentioned Joe, he knows where to.
Yeah,
let go. Also,
Joe doesn't overcook things ever. I don't think he's. There's a number of songs because now I've been listening to a lot and going back and listening, of course, where it's this is really lead guitar, maybe stereo, double tracked rhythm guitars, and that's about it. There's never too much going on,
So that's your, in a way, an idea you have: drums, bass, guitar.
A little bit, yeah. I love Joe's. One of my favorite records by him is the Extremist record, and it was either Glenn or Andy Johns. I think it was Glenn that did it, but a great sounding record. It's such a big sounding rock record, with that, I got to look that up and make sure. I think it's Glenn that did it, but if it's Glenn or Andy, a legendary rock guy, no matter what, producing, exactly. They're known for their, incredible rock sounds. And that's what I'd love to shoot for, is that kind of thing. I think like a record with that kind of impact on the, where everything can be big, like, when Zeppelin recorded, or, sure, even the Chili Peppers is kind of like this, actually, where, because there's only 4 things going on, their records are never that layered. They can leave all the tones really big, so the bass and the drums can be big, like great big ambient, or, lots of ring in the snare, and like just great drum sounds. And, that's the kind of record I'd love to make, something that's like that. Yeah.
Hey, before we wrap this up, I'd like to ask, because we didn't really talk about gear, and you're also obviously known about your knowledge about gear, right? Was that also from the get-go, like, because there's the music, right? Like, I want to play this and that, but also, how can I make it sound really good? So can you tell me something? How did that evolve?
Right away from the get-go, I was interested. I mean, when I got my first guitar, I think one of the first things I did was kind of take it apart to figure out, like literally like pop the neck off and like, how's this work, and take the pickguard off. Oh, this is where the volume pots are and stuff I see underneath here. I was always fascinated in that stuff, just to kind of the nuts and bolts of it. And then also guitar sounds. And it was a magic era of guitar sounds. I've been doing a series of clinics at some stores in the U.S., as well as went over to Japan and did some recently, all about guitar sounds. And, kind of my fascination with guitar tone. One of the things I play in the clinic is a bit of Owner of a Lonely Heart, Trevor Rabin. So this is the kind of stuff I was hearing in 84 or 85 that was blowing my mind.
That solo, like, what is that sound?
Yeah.
Think, right? Yeah.
And that's what, like, how did he do that? And then even, like, I use the example in the song of it starting with the huge reverb distorted guitar, this powerful guitar, and then it busts back down into a tight overdriven thing, and then goes into this super hyper compressed clean chorus thing. That's all before the vocals started.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And then the solo is epic. So I was always fascinated with that stuff and trying to, figure out how these guys were getting these incredible guitar sounds. And of course, it was the, era of Eddie Van Halen and Andy Summers. I mean, I loved what he was doing, and Alex Lifeson, who doesn't get talked about enough. Alex Lifeson, amazing.
Before I forget, because many players on this series talked about Eddie Van Halen, and I like to talk about him sometimes, and he's your hero, so to say, right? Like,
absolutely.
Can you describe what did he mean to you, not just as a musician, but just also as a human being?
Well, so he just seemed like, first of all, he was like the happiest guy in the world playing this amazing stuff on guitar. So like from the get-go, seeing him in, like I said, I saw the 84 tour. It just blew my mind, just this like superhero of guitar up there on stage. I was in third row on the floor watching him. Like, it was so loud I couldn't even tell what song when they started. It was Unchained, but I was right in front of the PA and I was like, oh my God, it's like the world's ending, and it sounded, and he's up there smiling and, just looking like he's having the greatest time ever. He was the man, and then when Sammy joined the band, they put out that Live Without a Net record. And concert, and the solo on that was just so mind-blowing, it was just incredible. And so I would just study that stuff forever and just be like, God, he seems so free when he's playing. It's just like, so.
But again, that happiness you mentioned, right? That's really interesting also.
Oh yeah, there was so much like joy in his playing, and also just precision, but also like the right combination of loose and tight. So, he was just kind of my number one guy, like for the longest time. So, but then years later, I actually, got to meet him and make friends with him. And so around 2009 is when we met for the first time. And he was, first of all, he was hilarious. Like, he was a riot. And, right from the get-go, from the first thing he said to me was, he had me like laughing, and I was just cracking because I was nervous, to meet him, really nervous. And then I met him and he made me laugh like instantly. And I was like, oh my God, I love this guy. He's amazing. And I got to spend, a fair amount of time with him, just going up to 5150 in his house to visit him and stuff and see him. And I would go to see him at, at a number of different shows. I was at the last Van Halen gig, actually, at the Hollywood Bowl, yeah. And, I remember seeing him in 2012 as well in Oakland. I flew up there to see him. And, he was just so brilliant. He'd come meet me and give you a big hug. He'd always give you a hug and a kiss on the cheek. That's how he was really like. He'd give you a big kiss on the cheek and give you a big hug. And it was like, this is my hero, he's just like, but I had to kind of turn that off when I was around him because otherwise I'd freak out maybe, So I'd always just kind of, try and be respectful of his time and also not geek out too much or fan out too much. I would never, I'd just be like, so how's it going? Like, how's you and Janie? What are you guys, doing around the house? Or what are you, I just ask him like things about home and how's Wolf doing? And, and we talk a lot he was so proud of Wolf, we would talk about Wolf a lot. And, just when I got together with him and stuff, and I just cherish those times so much, And he was one of the first. I remember after Chris Cornell passed away, I hit him up because I was just so devastated by that, and I hit him up like right after, and we had a good text exchange after because he knew Chris. That's how I met him. Actually, it's a long story, but through Chris, and so we talked, and I said, "Can I come see you? Like, I just really want to come see you, because of course he'd had health concerns over the years and scares and things like that." And I was like, "When I get back to LA, and I just, can I come up to the house? I really want to come see you." And he said, "Of course, And so I set up a meeting with him and went up and hung out with him for an hour or something like that, and just to be like, I was just becoming really aware of like mortality and like things. And I just, I don't know. And yeah, so because I was like, this guy's really important to me. I call him my spiritual guitar godfather, like that, and so he was really important to me on once again, I was mentors, coming back to mentors, and, Eddie was, a lot of people talk a lot of stuff about him and say things. And of course he had dark times and stuff like that. And he went through a lot, but nobody fought as hard as that guy. And he really fought to become a healthier, more evolved person, I think, he had demons like anyway, like we all do, because nobody's perfect, and all I saw from the time that I met him in 2009 until when he passed away was a guy that was just doing the best to be as good as he could be, with his health and, with his music, and he was with his, he was really trying, like as flawed as we all are, he was just a dude that was trying as hard as he could to and really had great spirit to live, So yeah.
Oh man, that has to land a little bit with me. You telling about him. I mean, it really hits me. I have to say. I mean,
I appreciate it. I mean, I wish I could have spent more time with him, got to know him even better. But I think his friends and people that knew him well all say, like, man, he fought so hard. The people don't even know the stuff that he went through, the level of like what was going on and how, and it was very inspirational actually to see like how devoted he was to, because at any given time, different people could just give up, you know what I mean? And he wouldn't. And then you'd see him like after just going through something really rough, like health wise and then you'd see him like a year later and it's like, dude, you look fantastic, like you see him on the 2015 tour, like how healthy he looked on that tour, like that last show, you can see him playing his guitar solo on the last Van Halen show. It's like, you're like,
I didn't know he was ill still. I was like, he
looks like fit and he's like, he looks healthy and he looks happy and he's smiling. He's that guy, and that, he'd been through a bunch of stuff leading up to that, and I think after that point it was, but man, he fought hard, like to just be his best. So that people should know that, that he it's like a lot of people say a lot of things about him, like, why didn't they do another record? They should be touring more, or should be doing this or that. It's like, man, the guy was like trying his hardest, I'll tell you. He really was. He was working he really wanted to do as much as he possibly could, I think Wolf would, they had plans. They wanted to do more and do, tour and stuff. And, but that was always what I saw, was he just wanted to get back to it and be, so.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Thanks for all the guitar nerd conversation.
My pleasure. Great questions, and I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Me too. And I can't wait to hear your third album. And I can't wait to see you on stage with Joe and Steve.
I'm so excited. Yeah. happy to be there. Like, it's not lost on me. I'm really excited.
Thanks for your time, and listeners also, thanks.
Thanks so much. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.